Now, God said now that Jacob, the word said that Jacob went over the brook and he started to wrestle. Now, a lot of us get caught in an identity crisis where we now are wrestling with what we are and what we are not. There comes a time when you wrestle with being a sinner and you wrestle with being a child of God. You wrestle with being a rapper and you wrestle with being a praise and worship leader. You wrestle with being a drug dealer, but you want to be a preacher. And you have to wrestle with that. Now, sometimes I believe that the Lord makes, and I don't want to sound contradictory, but the Lord sometimes puts us in a situation to realize what your identity is. I believe that the Lord put Jacob in this situation for him to understand what his purpose was, because as he went there and he spoke and he wrestled and he asked what the name of the person was, and the person would never give him a name. Now, when the person never gave him the name, the person that's now realized that Jacob wasn't going to stop. Now, as I wrestled, now me, I'm talking about me. As I wrestled. I said, look, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. I don't even want to go back to church. I've been to that point, and I stand there as a young person to you young people saying that I've been to a point where I have not wanted to even step foot in church. There were times, and if it wasn't for, and I thank God for my mother and thank God for my parents, because they instilled into me and they prayed, because there were nights when I just didn't feel like coming home because I knew they were going to church and I didn't want to be there because I felt as though I was better than the whatever. And I felt as though I could do better outside all by myself. I felt as though I could do better if I was young and running around. And I would come back to Jesus when I was 30. And then when I was 30, I would have a wife and kids and then be all holy and start to speak in tongues and start to move under the anointing of God. But no, God never had it to be so for me. I don't know about you. You could have been in church and been preaching since you were 3, but not me. God had to bring me here. God had to take me out of what I was in. He had to bring my identity towards me. I had to wrestle for what I was called to. Now, Jacob now said later on in the chapter, when he was wrestling with this person, this angel or this God, or however you want to say whatever he was, he wrestled. And as he wrestled, and the angel realized that he did not give up. And as I can say to somebody, do not give up. I want you to touch somebody and say, do not give up. Keep wrestling. Your identity is on the horizon. I don't know where that came from, but yes. Your identity is on the horizon. Now, let me tell you something. When God now said to Jacob, as he saw his persistency, he saw that he was not going to give up and he was going to wrestle with him till the breaking of day, because at this point he had no distraction. He had no wife. He had no husband. He had no phone. He had no Instagram. He had no Facebook. He didn't have to update his status and tell everybody about the goodness of the Lord and tell everybody what he did today. But he realized that all night long he was desperate. Now, I know I have some desperate young people in here that are looking, if you have not found your identity, that are looking for your identity. I don't want to preach, so I'm going to stop soon. That are looking for their identity. And now when Jacob got to the point where he found it, now he said, your name is no longer Jacob, but your name is now Israel. Why? Because he was going to have Israel out of his belly. Out of his seed was going to come Israel. Now, if I trace the genealogy of Christ, then if Jacob never wrestled, Jesus Christ would have never existed in that fashion. Because Jacob had to have Israel. Israel had to come out of Jacob in order for Jacob to come out. So sometimes it's not your purpose that God is looking to take out of you. Maybe it's my son that will be the dynamic preacher. Maybe it's your child that will come out and say, look, I will say thus said the Lord if mommy's not going to say thus said the Lord. I believe that sometimes we are too focused on ourselves when when last night I heard the preacher say that ministry is not just for us. Now, ministry is not just for us. Ministry is sometimes for what is inside of you. And sometimes you're at home and you have to realize your identity. Sometimes I have to speak to myself. I said, Nevin, look, sometimes you get too quiet. Sometimes you're not praying enough. Because the revelation that I got one night, I was praying, and the revelation that I got, I said to myself, I said, God, why am I praying so much? Why am I fasting so much? Why am I, doing all of these things? And I don't realize what it is. And God said, there is something inside of you. Now, he said to me that it might not be for you. It might be for your child or the child after your child. It might be for your great-grandchild. But you have to instill in yourself an identity that they have something to identify. Now, sometimes I believe that sometimes we as young people are walking around in an identity crisis. We get lazy. We don't want to wrestle. We don't want to stay up all night and fast. I don't know what happened to all-night prayer meeting. I don't know what happened to young people going to prayer service. Oh, well, sometimes I got to study. And I've been identified with I have to study. I can't go to school. I can't go to church. I got to study. I can't go to prayer meeting. I got to study. Then I got to work in the morning, Jesus. But no, sometimes it takes that extra push in order to get into the house of the Lord. Because if you get into the house of the Lord, I guarantee you when you get home, and you're going to remember every God thing that you studied. Now, I hear people getting quiet because maybe they don't understand what I'm saying, or maybe they don't see the fact that, what I'm saying is actually true, or they're convicted. So, as I said, your identity now has to be found in the Word of God. I don't think these days we aren't going to wrestle with actual angels. I don't think so. I don't think we're going to wrestle with actual angels. We aren't going to go over any rivers. We aren't going to do this, that, and the other. We drive, a lot of us. And if you tell us to go over a river, we ain't going. Or if God said to go over that river, we're going to use GPS to get over there. So what I'm saying is sometimes it's not the wrestling, it's not the physical wrestling we're going to have to do as young people to find our identity. It is the wrestling with your flesh. Because your flesh wants to do one thing. My flesh is over here, watching me right there, saying, okay, Nevin, you're tired. You went to bed last night at 3 o'clock. You were up reading. None of this is supposed to be coming out of your mouth. I am here, and I'm talking. Now, we have to wrestle with these things. We have to be willing to stay up and pray. We have to be willing to take that extra 5 minutes before we fall asleep. Or if God, sometimes, and I don't know if anybody else in here, it happens to anybody else, but in the middle of the night, 1, 2, 3 o'clock, the Lord will wake me up and say, pray. And I say, oh, God, Jesus, please. The bed feels nice. And I want to sleep, God. Oh, God, if I get up on now, I'm not going to fall back asleep. And at this point now, we must wrestle with ourselves, because when we are talking like that to God, it's not your spirit, it's your flesh. Because your flesh, this, is fighting, is telling you, no, we got to sleep. We got class in the morning. We have work in the morning. And I'll tell you this, I'll be completely honest with you. For the last few weeks, I've been pushing to study this for here. And I've had my internship. And then after the internship, I go to work. Very stressful situation. I come home, I'm tired. And one night I decided, all right, I'm coming home and I'm going to pray. And I'm going to read my word. I came home, and sometimes I believe that the distractions that we have in the home are very vital and they stop. Sometimes I think I can just dash the phone one side and just... The things that we have as distractions now are totally taking us away from the identity which we have formed from the beginning. We have an identity of children of God. We should be in the Word. We should be the first people in church. We should be standing up there and running service. Doesn't matter if it's men's, young people, women's Sunday. It doesn't matter at all. We should be operating, as the preacher said last night, we should be operating not just in the four walls, but everywhere else. One thing, and I'll tell you, and Sister Carice was so right last night, and I've been preaching, exhorting, doing things like this for 3-4 years, and my mom never said anything to me. Never. She never said, you know, I want you to train you to do this, train you to do that, da-da-da-da. What I came forward with, and I went to her before I was actually, when Brother Rich told me, you know, we want you to come speak, I was kind of timid to go to my mother because I don't know how she feels about me doing this. Because even when I preach, I can preach. And I'll stand up there and my mother will be sitting and her arms folded and she's just looking. Everybody else worshiping and she's just looking. And at the time, one time I'll never forget it. It was a Sunday night. I preached a Sunday night. And I mean, the place was crazy. And I looked down at my mom. I came down at the pulpit, wet, soaked from my head to my toe. The first time I ever preached at a big meeting. Soaked from my head to my toe, my mother looked at me. And she just let me pass. Now, this has something to do with my identity. I'm getting to it, but she just let me pass. And as she let me pass, I walked up. And one of the evangelists came and she hugged me and she wiped me down and she anointed me and she said, you know, go forth and do the work and da-da-da-da-da. That was the most, I went home and I cried eye water. Because I said, why don't I identify with my mother? Why don't I identify? Why doesn't she see me? Why isn't she saying anything? Is this not my identity? Is this not the calling which God showed to her for me? Now, she told me there was a call for me a long, long time ago. The day I filled, she told me there's a call for you and you're going to find it. I said, you're not going to help me? I know, you're going to find it. So, I'll never forget it when she now, before I was going to Brother Rich, and I just got off the phone with Brother Rich, and I went into my mother's room, and she was sitting there, and at this point, she just got her job, and she was really excited and going out everywhere, and she's saying, oh, I'm going to be working 12 hours, and I'm going to be doing this and that and that. So I said, Mom, can we sit and talk? So I talked to my mother, and I said, Mom, you know, I've been praying, and I've been fasting, and me and Brother Nicholas, if no one else knows in here, Brother Nicholas is my prayer partner. Me and Brother Nicholas prayed and prayed and prayed, and we came off of fasting, and I went in the room, and I told my mother, I said, Mom, in New Jersey, they want me to come and speak. I'm not going to preach, I'm not going to teach, but it's going to be something in between. And she said, go. I looked at her, I said, seriously? She said, go. She said, I've already anointed you to go. I knew what you were going to be from before you were even born. Go. Now, that clarified my identity crisis. That finished my identity crisis. Brother Rich didn't know that I was going through an identity crisis at that point in time. Because there would be times when I'd preach and I'd come out the pulpit and I'd say, God, no, I'm never preaching again. Never, because no one said anything. And my mother said, it's your call, go. I can't be there. But I'm sending the anointing with you. And she texted me again and said it this morning and said, let the anointing speak for you. And I said, all right. I didn't text her back. I said, all right, I'm just going to not say anything at all. But I'm making a point to say that it is not bad to be in an identity crisis. And I'm about to close. I'm going to make a few a few points and then I'm going to close. It is not bad to be in an identity crisis. It is what you do in this identity crisis. You have to wrestle. You have to do something in order to get out, because there is no way conceivable that you can get into heaven if you are having an identity crisis. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego at a point were about to be put to death, and their faith in God kept their identity in God intact. Moses was born a Jew and was in Pharaoh's house until he was sent out into the wilderness. And we all know the story of when Moses was in the wilderness and he was there and he started to eat what the animals would eat and everything, and he was there and he was struggling, and he went and he was there and he said, God, what am I doing here? I was in the king's palace. I was eating the king's food. I was eating the king's meat. I was taking all of their classes. I was doing everything that they were doing. But God said to him, that was not your identity. His identity was the one who would lead the children of Israel out of Egypt and out of bondage. Now that one I noted as to operate. Paul was on the road to Damascus and persecuted the saints. On the road to Damascus, Paul was blinded, and after he was blinded, he was granted identity. Now, when I was reading that, I kind of laughed, because the moment I read it, I felt like God just said, look, Paul had to lose his vision in order to gain a vision. And I said, God, you know, that's funny. Why did he have to lose his vision in order to see exactly what the Gentiles and all these people that were worshiping God at the time and the people that believed in Jesus at the time were seeing? Why did he have to lose his vision? Why did he have to do all of what he did first and then lose his vision? He said he now did not have to wrestle. I had to just give it to him. I'm doing this to show you that everybody gets their identity differently. You might not have to wrestle. And it said Job, now I have Job was stripped of everything he had. Job said, though he slay me, he never lost his identity. Some people have their identity from birth. I know a young man in Jamaica, and he's been preaching since he was about 5. He's been anointed to preach. He's been anointed to teach. He never had to go through any struggles. He never had to go through any pain or this, that, and the other. But he's fighting, but he never had to go through what I went through. That's why my experience might be different than Sister Nadine's experience. My experience may be different than Brother Nicholas's experience, because I had to wrestle, and that's why I identify with Jacob. Now, the Lord, last but not least, Gideon. In Judges 6, if you read Judges 6, I'm not actually going to go into it, but if you read Judges 6, Judges 6 says that the Lord spoke identity into Gideon. He said into Gideon, mighty man of valor. Now, Gideon didn't know who he was. He knew he was the leader of an army, but he did not know that in the future that he would be this mighty man. Now, if you, theoretically speaking, if you would have told me 5-6 years ago, Nevin, you'd be standing here at your godfather's church giving a word to young people, I would look at you and say, how did I get there? Why am I doing it? And who told me to do it? But you have to realize that the Lord will speak your identity into you. But it might not be for another 10 years. It might not be for another 30 years. And sometimes, as I said earlier, he might not be speaking it to you. Brother Bernard, he might not be speaking for a ministry in you. He might be speaking in a ministry for your son or your daughter. And tonight he might not be speaking in the ministry for you, but he might be speaking in the ministry for Levita's child. Whenever she does have one. I'm sorry, Uncle Johnny. But all I'm saying is that, and in closing, what I'm saying is, when you are trying to find your identity, when you are looking for what you are in God, do not be afraid to wrestle. Do not be afraid to get dirty. Do not be afraid to lose nights of sleep because you are in the presence of God. Because as the Bible said, the songwriter said, in the presence of the Lord there is fullness of joy, and at his right hand there are pleasures forevermore. Now you have to be able to get down and get dirty in order to find your identity if you have not found it. And if you have found it, fasting and prayer. And I'm commissioning everyone today, and I don't know why this just came to me, but I'm commissioning everyone today to, from this point on, and I will join you. If you need my number, I'm here. I'm commissioning everyone today, at the sound of my voice, to now put into action this identity crisis. This is not the time for us to be sitting around with an identity crisis. You see what's going on? There's a tornado almost every day. I was watching the news. Sometimes I'm scared to watch the news because I'm like, Jesus, you gonna come before I get married? And I have to look at it and I said, look, this is happening. This is happening. War. They're calling for World War III. World War III. I looked and said, didn't that happen already? No, somebody said, no, it's going to happen. You have people dying every day. You have children killing children. You have men loving men. You have women loving women. And you have people putting up with it. And we are the church of God. We are identified as the church of God, and we cannot find ourselves in this mess. That is why if you have an identity crisis, well, let me tell you something. If you have an identity crisis, the enemy is going to try to sift you. And he probably will be successful if you are in this identity crisis. Now, as I'm about to close, and I said that 3 times, I'm going to close now. As I said that, I'm commissioning everyone in here under the sound of my voice. So that means anyone downstairs in the bathroom, anyone downstairs in the dining area, anyone in any offices, any sound rooms. As young people, step up and take the mantle which was bared for you. Last night, I saw a lot of people go up and get prayer, and under the heaven recorded it that you are going to be commissioned. Now, I feel as though God has just given me instructions for you to now go into this commission. He's telling me now, fasting 1 day a week. Even if you're working. Now, some of us say, I'm working. I can't fast because I get hungry on the job. Kill the flesh. He's saying fasting, prayer. And when I wake you up at nighttime, don't complain. I just want the Lord to continue to bless this household because it's where I was born. And a lot of the times I always look back and I say, when I was just a child and I used to gather my brothers and sisters up and sit them down in the playroom, and I would open an Aladdin book and start to preach to them, and they would say, oh, you remind us of Elder. And that's what I always wanted to do, but somewhere along the line I lost my identity. Now, if you can just stand, and we're going to sing before we go into our breakout sessions, correct? You are awesome in this place, mighty God. You are awesome in this place.